London, 1910. On a freezing winter morning in Whitechapel, an 8-year-old girl named Eleanor Graves stood every day in front of a bakery window. Her hair was messy, her fingers red and sore from the cold, and her thin dress hung on her skinny body. She held an empty cloth bag close to her chest, silent hope wrapped in cloth. Inside the bakery window, golden loaves of bread, warm buns, and shiny jam tarts sat in the early light. But Eleanor had no money, no food, no future. Her father, an Irish laborer, had died when a scaffold collapsed. Her mother worked long hours washing clothes for other people. But the deepest pain wasn't in Eleanor's stomach. It was in the quiet truth she saw clearly. Some children are born with everything, and others are born with nothing but hunger. So Eleanor made herself a promise. She would learn to read. She would find a way out, not just for herself, but for every child like her. She picked up old newspapers from the streets and taught herself the letters. A parish priest noticed the little girl with fierce eyes and helped her get a place at the church school. There, Eleanor found an old anatomy book and fell in love with the idea of healing people. She didn't dream of wealth or a big house. She dreamed of helping children feel better. In 1923, with a scholarship and her unshakable will, she entered university. As a poor girl in a world built for wealthy men, she was laughed at, ignored, and looked down on. But she kept going. In 1930, she became a children's doctor and spent her life fighting child hunger. Years later, people knew her simply as Dr. Graves. She ran a small clinic in Mayfair during the day and traveled back to East London at night with a bag full of medicine, bread, and used coats. She never married, never took a holiday, never saved money. "I can't change the whole world," she once told a student, "but I can change a child's night." Her charity, the Bread of Dreams, gave out free meals and medical help to thousands. When she died in 1980, alone, in a small rented room filled with children's drawings and letters, there were no news stories, no statues, no streets named after her. But somewhere in London, a child eats tonight without fear, and the kindness of Eleanor Graves still lives on in that warmth. Upon arriving in Brazil and witnessing slavery up close, Charles Darwin wrote, "Near Rio de Janeiro, my opposite neighbor was an old lady who had thumbscrews with which she crushed the fingers of her female slaves. In a house where I stayed earlier, a young mulatto servant was, every day and at all hours, insulted, beaten, and persecuted with a fury capable of discouraging even the most inferior of animals. I saw a child of 6 or 7 years old struck on the head with a whip before I could interfere, because he had served me a glass of somewhat muddy water. And these are things done by men who profess to love their neighbor as themselves, who believe in God, and who pray that His will be done on earth. Our blood boils, and our heart beats stronger, to think that we, Englishmen, and our American descendants, with their boasted cry for liberty, were and are guilty of this enormous crime." Charles Darwin, The Voyage of the Beagle. Did Hitler make any contributions to modern society? He, himself, made none. But from the Nazi government, generally only 2 lasting contributions are cited. First, Volkswagen, which in German means the people's car, began by making small military cars with machine guns, called Kübelwagens, for the Spanish Civil War and the Desert War. For this, they designed a very efficient engine that did not require water. Several types were made. These small tanks, in their civilian version created in 1938, were sold in Nazi Germany on installment plans to the public, hence the name, with small payments. And although the Beetle, Hitler's idea and original name, and designed by the Porsche company, yes, that Porsche, is a successor to the Porsche Type 2, and not the first compact car, it is the most popular compact car in history. Second, old age pensions. It was probably not his specific idea but the idea of his economists, but the Nazi government invented the idea of old age pensions where you pay throughout your life and receive an income from the government when you retire, which are now common in all advanced countries. But the same party, in the same reform, also made private charity illegal, so that everyone would be dependent on their government. And it soon proceeded to murder and imprison the weak en masse, including the elderly, to save money. Thus, his government never truly paid many of those same pensions. During his tenure, it remained pure propaganda. But after the fall of the Reich, Other democratic countries with strong economies, including West Germany, managed to implement it for real. Did a place called the Byzantine Empire ever exist in history, or was it an invention of historians? The name was never used by the Byzantines themselves. They always considered themselves Romans. Long after the Eastern Empire abandoned Latin and lost regular contact with the West, Constantinople was still technically called New Alpha Mueta, New Rome, or Delta Epsilon Upsilon Alpha Mueta, Second Rome. Greek speakers sometimes used Beta Upsilon Zeta Alpha Nutiota Mueta, Byzantine Rome, since the imperial city overlapped the location of the much smaller and less important classical city of Byzantium. However, that was only to distinguish their capital from the original Rome. Most Christians in the Ottoman Empire were still technically referred to as Romans in the eyes of Ottoman law until the 19th century. The modern use of Byzantine for the empire is quite recent. Westerners began substituting the word Greeks for the people who still called themselves Romans around the 11th century, but the older usage persisted until the time of the Fourth Crusade, when East-West relations reached their lowest point. Thereafter, Westerners basically ignored the Roman character of the still-living Eastern Roman Empire. However, even in 1438, when Emperor John VIII Palaiologos visited Italy hoping to find support against the Turks, those in the know recognized his proper title. This medallion is in Greek, but was made in Italy by Pisanello. It reads, John Palaiologos, King and Emperor of the Romans, Omega Mu Alpha Omega. The modern use of Byzantine dates back to a German Renaissance scholar, Hieronymus Wolff, who used the term in part to distinguish between the classical Rome of Caesar and the less familiar Eastern Empire that had just fallen to the Turks a generation before he wrote his Corpus Historiae Byzantini, or Body of Byzantine History, in 1557. This was primarily a bit of disambiguation, like emphasizing British over English, but it eventually acquired negative connotations. Wolff's distinction was very popular in the 17th and 18th centuries. Enlightenment-era writers liked to emulate the authors and politicians of the Roman Republic and the early empire, and were eager to distance themselves from the exotic, highly religious, and somewhat unreliable stereotypes that had accumulated around the Eastern Romans. Calling the Eastern version Byzantine helped to erase it from the prestigious heritage that philosophers wanted to claim. So, Byzantine Empire is an exonym, and one that ranges from derogatory to actively hostile. Most modern scholars prefer Eastern Roman Empire for that reason. Have archaeologists ever found evidence of major battles that were otherwise unknown to historical records? You bet they have. In 1996, the Talents Valley battlefield was discovered in northern Germany. About 200 years ago, two armies clashed at a river crossing near the Baltic Sea. The confrontation cannot be found in any history book. The written word only became common in these parts 2,000 years later. But this was no mere skirmish between local clans. Thousands of warriors engaged in a brutal fight, perhaps fighting on a single day, using weapons made of wood, flint, and bronze, a metal that was then the ultimate in military technology. Source: Slaughter at the Bridge. Uncovering a colossal Bronze Age battle, it's unclear who was fighting whom, but there is some evidence that suggests a clash between local tribes and groups from South-Central Europe. Before this discovery, it wasn't believed possible that armies of 5,000 combatants could be organized and sustained in Northern Europe at that time. What is something in history that you feel strongly was lied about or exaggerated? The French aristocracy before the Revolution was not the class of careless, luxury-loving bastards who cruelly lorded over everyone, as has been made out. Proof of this is that many of the most prominent revolutionaries were nobles. Along the same lines, Louis XVI was not overthrown for being a tyrant, but for not being one. His kind, indecisive, and docile character, compared to his warmongering predecessors Louis XV and Louis XIV, made him a target. Previous kings remained reasonably popular. Despite engaging in wars and spending exorbitant amounts of money that would eventually lead to the kingdom's downfall, these rulers were generally respected by a large part of the population. Just like with the last Tsar of Russia, the king who ended up losing his head to the guillotine was a fairly quiet and open-minded man, open to reform. There is the stereotype of wasteful nobles and powdered wigs, and the belief that Marie Antoinette told the hungry to simply eat cake, which is completely divorced from reality. In truth, many nobles were social reformers, generous to the poor, conscientious, and deeply cared about the common man. The revolutionaries who took power, many of them blue-blooded themselves, turned out to be worse than the elites they ended up killing. Lucrezia Borgia, a legacy of power and brilliance. An extraordinary and unjustly maligned historical figure, Lucrezia Borgia, 1480 to 1519, was a Renaissance luminary whose reputation was unfairly tainted by the black legend fueled by Italian, and specifically Roman, resentment toward the powerful Valencian Borgia family. Far from the villain of legend, she was a highly accomplished polyglot, patron of the arts, and effective ruler, wielding significant political power across the Italian peninsula. She is considered one of the most powerful and influential women in human history. Key achievements and historical impact. Temporary head of the church, 1501 appointed vicar of the church by her father, Pope Alexander VI, she temporarily assumed leadership of the Papal States in Rome, demonstrating exceptional administrative skill despite fierce opposition. Masterful governance. Served as governor of cities including Spoleto, Nepi, and Foligno. As Duchess of Ferrara, from 1505, she transformed her court into one of the most brilliant and culturally rich centers in all of Europe. Political titles: Countess of Pesaro, Duchess of Bisceglie, and Duchess of Ferrara. Intellectual and artistic prowess. Lucrezia Borgia was a quintessential Renaissance woman, celebrated for her intelligence and skills. Polyglot and writer, fluent in 6 languages: Valencian, Spanish, Greek, Italian, French, and Latin, with the ability to write effectively in all of them. Orator, highly praised for her eloquence, reputed to have given a speech in Latin at age 17, with such elegance and gentleness that not even Cicero could have spoken with more precision and grace. Diverse talents, a brilliant mathematician, masterful musician, magnificent draftswoman, and a tireless reader. Cultural and artistic immortality. Her captivating life has inspired countless artists and writers, ensuring her name is never forgotten. Artistic muse, immortalized in portraits by renowned masters, including Leonardo da Vinci, Pinturicchio, and Bartolomeo Veneto. Literary subject, central figure in works by literary giants, including Victor Hugo, Alexander Dumas, Apollinaire, Nobel laureate Dario Fo, and Gabriele D'Annunzio. Operatic figure, subject of an opera composed by Gaetano Donizetti. Enduring cult status, a lock of her prettiest and most beautiful golden hair is preserved as a relic in the Pinacoteca Ambrosiana in Milan, famously admired by Lord Byron, who described the love letters written to her by humanist Pietro Bembo as the most beautiful love letters in the world. Reframing the legacy. Her enduring bad reputation is attributed to the political terror and power dynamics of the era. Her life and accomplishments, however, reveal a strong, indomitable woman, a Caesar of Rome, whose ability to command admiration and influence the world around her speaks to a legacy that transcends the slanders of her time. What is the weirdest fact you know about historical figures? More than one English king has died on the toilet. Can you think of a more embarrassing way to go? We hate it when someone accidentally walks in on us, let alone being found dead in the loo. The first English king to die in the toilet was King Edmund in 1016, who was stabbed to death while doing his business. In 1216, exactly 200 years later, King John died in or near his latrine from dysentery. Then, in 1760, King George II also went to his maker while on the porcelain throne. And King Henry I died in 1135 after gorging himself on lampreys, a type of river eel, which means he likely had a little trouble on the toilet. If you want to know even more about historical toilet deaths, Wikipedia actually has a page about it.
Hi, I'm Lucrezia. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel.